on today's Edge of Wonder, the third and final installment of our three-part series.
Another little piece of new intel I can give you guys, and I might get in trouble for saying this. Main goal of the cabal, they wanted to create starvation, economic collapse. They wanted to create anarchy and chaos. This is a fight to the death.
With existential issues as massive and overwhelming as the ones presented in this series with David Wilcock, what can any one person do?
Why not jump in and get involved like you guys are doing with Edge of Wonder? Because it's not just other people doing this, it's not just military people, it's all of us. This is a team effort, because the more people learn about this, the faster we will get the mass arrests and disclosure.
It appears that our mission is clear. So what's next?
I would expect that in 2019, at the very least, we will be seeing the aftermath or the result of...
Find out now in this epic final episode with none other than David Wilcock. Only on the Edge of Wonder.
Recently, we actually had Corey Good on the show, and we kind of talked about this a little bit, but there is this strange and bizarre division that seems to be happening in this community. We've heard from the other side, they're talking about things like transhumanism and whatnot, and it made both Rob and I kind of be like what? like it's just interesting things. And basically we want to understand from your perspective, what is this division about? Why is this happening? And what is like the purpose of this division?
Well, this is a very significant question in the sense that I have been an observer of the UFO community literally since the dawn of the internet in 1995. That's when I first got online. And originally it was all about Art Bell and Coast to Coast AM, and he had 20 million people listening, and there really was no competition. If you wanted to hear what was new and hot in this field, you're not going to get it on TV. There was no YouTube, and there was only one radio show of any significance. So even back then, I was very tapped into it. I again started listening pretty much 1996. The tail end of 95, I was just getting my feet wet on the internet. All the way back then, I noticed that there were very, very vivid arguments happening in what we would now call discussion forums, I guess. They didn't even really have a name back then. But the trolling phenomenon that people now see so much of on social media was a very, very serious issue all the way back in 1996. The level of hatred that people had for the folks that were talking on Art Bell's show, I found extremely surprising. To me, it was like, if you're going to talk about something this exciting, this new, this fresh, even the possibility that this stuff is true is fantastic. For example, with Richard C. Hoagland, who's the one I followed the closest, why would you not be interested in the idea of a giant mountain 1.5 miles wide, carved on the face of Mars to look like a humanoid face with a headdress around it? Immediately to the left of that area is what undeniably looks like a city made of Egyptian-style pyramids, and then immediately to the south, the same distance away, is an undeniable 5-sided gigantic 1.5 miles wide pyramid. There's no question it's a pyramid. But then even more interesting is that it's not a perfect pentagonal shape. It's actually distorted slightly in favor of the shape of the Vitruvian Man, like Leonardo da Vinci, where you have a human being with the arms and legs out in a 5-star pattern. So that would imply that the pyramid was built by humans that look like us, and the mesa was built by humans that look like us. So look, even if it's not really true, you got to say to yourself, my God, if this guy is at all right, if he's at all correct, we have so many questions we need to ask. For example, if the face looks like a lion on one side and a hominid on the other, which you can clearly see in the images, that implies a sphinx next to pyramids, which again suggests some kind of complementarity between Egypt and what we're seeing on Mars. And Mars is essentially a devastated planet, but then as of 2012, NASA is telling us, no, 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 Mars once had oceans that were over a mile deep, covering more than half of its entire surface. Mars was like Earth. So it's entirely possible that there were people there who destroyed their biosphere and that we may actually be their descendants, but we forgot where we came from. So if that's true, then why are we fighting about it? Why are we arguing about, why do you see these people getting just destroyed on the internet? And I don't really have a good answer for you guys except to say that in the entirety of the time I've observed the UFO movement, I've noticed that no one is really getting the recognition they want, and certainly no one is making very much money at this.
Very true.
Yeah.
I could tell you stories about, you know, being a New York Times bestselling author and how astonishingly little money I make from that. The fact that I have to spin other plates, I can't be an author and have that pay the bills because I just am never going to make enough. Even though I'm one of the top 3 authors for my label, you would be astonished at how little I actually get. You know, that means other people who aren't going to get those levels of you know, sales, it's almost like you're only going to write a book in order to have a business card to promote other things that you would then be able to monetize. And it's the same thing with television. You could get on a serious mainstream cable TV show and not make anywhere near enough to support a family. So that's like hitting the big time, and it's funny because it's the same thing that happened to my father back in the 1970s. This was the peak of rock and roll music, in my opinion, most people's opinion. There's more original music coming out in the 70s of high quality than any other era in music history. And my father was able to get a job writing for Rolling Stone magazine about rock and roll in the 1970s. Okay? You would think that's a dream come true because my father's a rock and roll journalist. However, he was only going to get paid $25 a column to write for Rolling Stone. And he very bitterly realized that because he had me, and then my brother, there was no way that he could support the family writing for Rolling Stone in the peak of the era of rock and roll. And it's the same way today. I literally have to write books, I have to be on TV, I have to do conferences. So then when you think about the fact that I have a lot of name recognition and I'm still financially struggling, what happens with people who only get 1 or 2 of those gigs? You don't really want to have to take a quote-unquote real job, but how are you going to finance yourself? How are you going to make it? And so this is actually a problem now, you guys. It's plaguing the arts in general. And I'm talking about everything from classical music, whether you do orchestral. I'm talking about jazz, which is almost completely profit-free now. People pay to play jazz in a club. They pay the club. If you have a rock band, you basically have to give your music away. The only way that you might make money is if you do concerts and then you sell merch at the concerts. It's the same thing with painting. It's the same thing with sculpture. It's the same thing with dance, ballet, theater. If you're going to do theatrical work, you want to do a play, you want to do, you know, live stand-up comedy, improv, whatever. There's like, the arts have just been devastated, and that's part of the economy we're in. So it affects everybody, and where this relates back to the UFO community, I feel, is that people feel like the only way they can maintain their competitive edge is to promote their little slice of the pie, whatever that might be, as if it is the big thing. They want to be the wedge that's going to drive in to the mainstream consciousness and change the game and create this avalanche of disclosure. And I think maybe part of why I've drawn such rage from so many people, including certain members of my own community in the UFO field, is that I don't just pick one plot of land. I'm trying to get way up there in the airplane and look at the whole thing, look at the whole lay of the land, and figure out what are we really seeing, and how do all these amazingly complex pieces fit together?
Hey David, I think it's really interesting that we're talking about the arts right now, because I've noticed that there's a lot of artists actually in the disclosure community. A lot of people don't know this about me, but I actually classically trained as a classical painter for a while. I was studying with a guy who, he actually restored Renaissance oil paintings, and this is, shortly after I got out of school. And it was really interesting for me because I saw my skills go up so much, kind of like how you're describing, right? And I was really painting at a different level. And then when it came to actually the business side of it, actually making money off of it, I realized I was hopelessly out of my, totally out of my league. I mean, I was a young guy. Yeah. But what I've noticed is that there's a lot of people with talent out there. There's a lot of people with talent out there. And so even though there's a lot of people with talent, you don't necessarily get to become the person who makes that level of money, who actually becomes famous. You're talking about a drop in an ocean. And so what I'm sometimes try to explain to people is especially right now, with the cabal having so much control over what they have, any person who has an enormous amount of influence, especially in the arts, you kind of have to look side-eyed at, because there may be a reason that they're there. There may be a deal that they had to cut. And with everyone making so little money and you getting an opportunity, to actually jump up, you're much more willing to actually bite, do something, sign something, say something, go the next level and actually do some crazy crap that is going to get you to the level where you're doing, I mean, you're making a lot of money and they're probably telling you even what to write. I mean, all kinds of crazy stuff, right? So I just think it's, really interesting that we're on this subject, because I don't think people really fully grasp how incredibly important the arts is for humanity and how much that actually controls all of us. And I'm wondering if you have anything that you'd like to say about that.
Well, first of all, my wife and I just watched this movie that was a new release at the time of the taping that we're doing now, last night, called The House with a Clock in Its Walls.
You're Lewis, I presume. How was your trip?
And it is absolutely loaded with pentagrams and images of the devil and the all-seeing eye. Just everywhere. An astonishing amount of this weird symbolism, upside down crosses, the Baphomet head in the pentagonal shape. So much. I keep pausing the thing, and I'm like, look at that, look at that, look at that. Did you see that? Did you see that? And so, one of the benefits of me having this really fast processing brain is I can watch movies and in real time see the cabal symbolism that people normally would only get subconsciously. It could be a split second and I'll be like, ooh, there's a 666 right there. Let's go back and look at that. And sure enough, there it is.
Magic, wizards, witches, warlocks. There's some scary stuff in there. Not too scary. You don't want to give kids nightmares, but you want to give them a thrill.
So, yeah. And then another thing, since we're talking about music and the arts, and I love this type of conversation, my wife and I have been going to, we needed to go to a bunch of stores recently, just regular stores, like Home Depot and Bed Bath & Beyond, and Crate & Barrel, and Whole Foods, and every store we went to had what I'm now calling Illumipop, or fake music. The music has never been worse in the history of music.
Amen.
And then my brother, I was arguing with my brother about this, who's a DJ, and he also fixes Apple computers, and he says, oh, you're just getting old and you're a snob now. And I said, Michael, it really is worse than it's ever been. Everything sounds exactly the same. There's been scientific studies that have been done on the intellectual level of the lyrics of these songs, and they are extremely dumbed down. And what is so peculiar right now is the fact that, like you guys said, there's all these people out there with talent. There's plenty of women who could sing like Whitney Houston. There's plenty of women who could sing like Mariah Carey. There's plenty of talented artists, but yet what you're hearing is a new low. It's almost as if, first of all, we notice that like almost all of the songs are female vocals. There's hardly ever male vocals. Second of all, almost all of the females sound identical. You couldn't differentiate who they are unless you go back and look them up. They're all auto-tuned, so they all have this, they don't need to be able to sing, right? And then even the arrangement, the type of instruments, the way that it sounds, the chord progressions they use, it's typically this 4-chord, very similar progression in every song, and it's garbage. And it's not just me saying that, it's a widespread thing, but yet you cannot go to any of these grocery stores or any of these corporate places and not hear this stuff. And then the really crazy part, as you guys know, and I'm sure probably most of you watching this know, what happens when you go online to YouTube and then you try to watch the video of the schlock, the fake music that you're hearing in the store?
It's full of symbolism.
All this weird stuff with, you know, fragmented multiple personalities and you know, the mannequin, which means like the personality that they can just put on any face on you that they want. Images of people in cages, the all-seeing eye, the Masonic square, the arch of Baal, which is the symbol of the devil. It's these two pillars with an arch over the top. I mean, they do it over and over and over. And the only way that we're ever going to end this collective nightmare is by continuing to expose it. If you just bury your head and say, well, I don't really know if there's an alliance, I don't really know if any international force is trying to oppose this thing, maybe it's just, you know, this is just the way it is. This is just the way life is. The world sucks. These guys are in control. They're diddlers. They molest kids. I can't do anything about it. Take my hands off the wheel. No, I'm not saying that at all. We are the change that needs to happen. We are making that change happen. How amazing was it that Above Majestic, despite being banned by Facebook, they literally would not let us talk about the movie that we nonetheless debuted on the first day at #1 on Apple and Amazon, both of the two main movie streaming platforms. And that to me shows that the world is waking up, and it is only a matter of time before this all changes.
But I want to ask you something else that I think is really important for our community, which is there's, like, in our community, a portion of the hate that I see, or the mudslinging, as you might call it, going back and forth, is like when you have people predicting things that then don't happen because something changed. Like either something, it's a very complicated situation, as you know, right? And sometimes the things that were planned, even may have been planned for hundreds of years, don't pan out. And then there's guys like you out there that are actually predicting a lot of these things and saying, hey, you know, this is going to happen at this time, or, you know, it looks like things are changing and this is what's going to happen. And then it, you know, like I said, it doesn't actually happen the way that you said it was going to happen, or it happens at a later time. So I was really hoping to give you an opportunity to talk about this, because it is such a complicated situation, and people are constantly using that as an excuse to not listen to guys like you, to not listen to guys like Corey Goode or Emery Smith. And, you know, what do you have to say about that?
So let's engage on this, because this is important. So yes, that's a very interesting question. Now, you have to understand that my perspective on this is pretty almost singularly unique, because other than maybe Benjamin Fulford, I'm the only other guy out there who's been getting briefings on this operation to take down the cabal for over a decade. It's been an ongoing interaction, and it used to be pretty easy to get information. The Alliance was really telling me quite a bit through Pete Peterson, who's literally having briefings from these people in the Navy, the Marines, these high-level officials, in what they call a SCIF room, SCIF, which is Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility. And in these rooms, you're hearing about this binder, this 5-inch thick binder called the Plan, that it was developed even before Kennedy in the 1950s, that the cabal had this plan to completely destroy our civilization. In fact, part of their plan was, as you guys remember me talking about, They have actually put explosive charges into every bridge on the Eisenhower interstate system that goes over these big chasms. And the governors of each state have secret codes to blow those bridges, which they then disguise it as if it was a temperature and pressure sensor that these guys put in there to make sure the bridge isn't going to crumble, right? But it can actually be used as an explosive. And they would even steer the roads to make sure they go through these chasms. And on the secret level, they were told, we got to do it this way so that if we get a land invasion, that we can stop the tanks from rolling into the middle of America. So there's literally no way to get off the coast and go inland except over these bridges that they could blow, okay? But what they didn't tell you is that they intended to blow all the bridges and bring America to its knees, create mass starvation, mass chaos. That's part of the plan. And the cabal's plan also included that the military goes around under the guise of national security, and they literally go around and they siphon out the gas from everybody's cars in these big tankers. So you can't even drive your car. And they wanted to create starvation, economic collapse. They wanted to create anarchy and chaos. So the guys in the Navy, the guys in the Marines, they took an oath to protect the people and to protect the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. They don't like this. So they've been working for many years to bring this thing down. And I have had so many briefings about this for so long. I've had people get killed who told me this stuff. I've had people get threatened for telling me this stuff. I've had people who were insiders who then stopped talking. And so because I've been engaged in this thing for many, many years, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but Q is almost an afterthought. It's been going on for so long. I've gotten such quality intel. We've been on the front lines, risking our lives, taking these steps. I don't need to be convinced. I don't need to be convinced of whether this is going to happen. I understand how disheartening it is to wait and wait and wait and think that nothing is going to come out of this. And even people who are very close to me have flipped sometimes into that way of thinking. What I can tell you is that there are so many people behind the alliance now. It's such a comprehensive plan. It's so thorough. It's so deep. It's so vast. There is no way that the cabal can throw it off. And the reason why we keep getting delays is that the alliance is trying to do it as quickly as possible, but then they run into obstacles. This is a fight to the death. So I do believe it will happen, and I believe they've tried to make it happen over and over again. But instead of us being negative about why it hasn't happened yet, why not jump in and get involved like you guys are doing with Edge of Wonder, which I applaud you for this. Get involved, help the alliance effort out, because it's not just other people doing this, it's not just military people, it's all of us. This is a team effort, and educating people and spreading the word is a critical element of making sure that the mission will succeed. So if you don't like what's going on, instead of putting your energy into trolling, why not put your energy into spreading knowledge? Because the more people learn about this, the faster we will get the mass arrests and disclosure.
Standing ovation right there. Yes.
That's it. That's how I roll.
Yeah, we completely agree, you know, and it's like, it's kind of like the delays that you're talking about too, it's like, from my understanding, I believe that there's a divine creator, and that these people, I believe, are also they're given chances again and again, because it's kind of like, if everyone got arrested, all these things happen, like our entire world would change.
Collapse.
And any chances that these people would have to kind of be saved in the light, I guess you could say, it's like it's over for them. And I believe that maybe that, like you said too, it's also a chance for people to step forward who haven't stepped forward yet, or who are questioning all these things. And it's like the more that we can step forward as a human race, and the more that we put our hopes and beliefs in this thing and put pressure on the government and put pressure on all these different organizations and groups and everything else, it's going to force the different organizations in the government to respond to it. So I believe that's why we're very, very on point on exactly what you're saying. Like, we completely agree, and that was one of the things that we want to do too, is like, wow, we want to play our role. We want to help with this. We want to help awaken people and have people believe that everything's not all doom and gloom, that there is hope there.
Well, let's give them a taste of their own medicine, for crying out loud. They've been doing this to us our whole lives. Like, we didn't even have, like, the 1950s. Like, we grew up in the 80s. Like, it was weird. I mean, you remember the 80s, David. The 80s were weird. I mean, you probably were in high school. I mean,
It's hard for people now to really grasp, younger people to really grasp how constant the nuclear war, instant death propaganda machine was running throughout the entire decade of the 1980s. We really did not know if at any moment that missiles were going to launch and we're just gone forever, and the whole planet is gone forever. And that really stuck through until the Soviet Union collapsed, 1990, 1991. And then they immediately just changed us over to, oh, now it's terrorists and now it's Iraq. But nonetheless, I was very pleased when the nuclear war threat with the Soviet Union finally collapsed, because they really had us on the ropes thinking this was going to happen. And they were trying to do it, by the way. It's just that various extraterrestrial groups that are right around here were not allowing them to have a nuclear war. They wanted to, and we talk about this in Above Majestic quite a bit. So that's another really good thing to check out the movie for.
you know, I often tell people this, and they don't really understand, but that actually our show and actually reality is like where politics, aliens, and the occult all kind of like Venn diagram together. And it's so weird, right? I mean, it's weirder than the weirdest movie. Yeah. And you actually can't really talk about any of them without talking about the other. And that's where I think people just have the hardest time, because it's like, how can we, you know, you can buy the Cold War, right? What you just said about the Cold War, like you and I talking about that, you can totally buy it. But when it comes to actually the other things that were involved that influenced all of that, we've been just trained to not even accept it at all. Like, it's just so difficult for people to swallow, and it's really unfortunate, because we're missing a huge part of the human story, a huge part of the history, which, by the way, is already completely fake.
Right.
I mean, you know.
Yeah, well, and going on with that, it's like you're saying, growing up in the 80s, then it's like, you know, you start realizing, when you start seeing the truth, you're like, oh my gosh, have I been lied to my whole life? And you just can't accept it, because you're just like, these people I grew up with, it's like, they can't be doing this. This can't be going on. I trust these people. I've put my faith in these people, and now you're telling me that they're like these satanic worshipers? Like, this can't be real, because it's too hard for people to realize that their life has just been, they've been controlled almost, like what's been fed to us. And it's hard to break out of that.
I know. I mean, look, I feel for you guys, because I actually grew up in the 70s, but then in the 80s I was a teenager, and I graduated high school in 1991. So being a young adult in the late 80s and really seeing the peak of the nuclear threat from the Soviet Union, all this, it was very intense, and I think it affected all of us as a generation, you know, because you really are faced with constant mortality in a way that doesn't really happen now the same way. Yeah, I call it the man in the bedroom effect. You know, I remember as a little kid when Ronald Reagan got elected. I remember 1980, and I actually had wanted Jimmy Carter to win. I just liked him more, you know. But then I was, I guess, what, 7 years old when Reagan, or 8 years old when Reagan took office. You know, he had this really great television persona. And so when I would watch Ronald Reagan, I would feel relaxed. I would feel like it was my dad, or like this wise old man. And he was very likable, and he spoke in language I could understand, you know, and I liked Reagan once he became elected. And so to realize now that, like, Reagan's administration, which probably wasn't really him, because I think he was working with the Alliance, you know, but that under his administration, that all of these crazy deregulations of the financial industry took place that have now led to the millennial generation becoming adults in 2008. And it's such a disrespectful insult that they call it the Great Recession. They don't even want to call it a Great Depression 2.0 when the metrics are identical to the Great Depression, if not worse. If you really start digging into this, it's like, is it really a depression if nobody calls it that, if the media won't call it that? But what's happened now is that the infrastructure we have has collapsed. You do need to get a college education, theoretically, right? Because you need to have, you don't want to be uneducated. But at the same time, it's a scam. This whole idea that my grandparents taught me, you get a college education, you're going to get a good job, you're going to make money, you're going to be all set. It's BS. Now, people are saddled with college loan debts that they could never hope to repay. They're having multiple jobs. There's so many of these stories in the millennial generation. And then what the cabal has done, which is very, very clever, okay? It's their divide and conquer strategy. And I see so many millennials falling into this. So I want to speak to them right now. You see them online saying that their parents' generation and the baby boomer generation stole all the money from them. They get all the good jobs. They want us to fight each other. They want the millennials to think that, oh, well, you know, people that are Generation X and baby boomers, they can own homes, they're getting paid better, they're getting better jobs. They've organized so that the millennials can't get those jobs, the millennials can't buy houses, the millennials have to live with their parents. They have to, you know, like whatever it is, 34% of people under the age of 35 are living with their parents in America. It's crazy. And nobody talks about it. It's like this whole thing that the media just ignores. So the younger people feel very hurt. And I think this has a lot to do with this epidemic of online trolling. Because they're at home and they're not making enough money and they're still living with their parents, which means you're still getting abused by your parents. You're still like a kid. They're not going to let you really be an adult when you're still living with them. And there's all this anger and rage and they just channel it into the internet. And you see just this unbelievable amount of hatred on the internet. And in terms of the law of karma and everything, you really have to be aware that if you hate people online, you still get karma. You're not getting away with it. You might think you are, but you're still having to pay for this in terms of the stuff that comes back into your life that's negative. This is another depression. It's the same thing. It's historically, cyclically the same thing. And we need disclosure because part of what disclosure will create is we've heard now trillions of dollars of money that the cabal stole has been identified, the accounts have been identified, the accounts have been frozen, and when we get mass arrests, when we get the unsealing of the indictments, part of what's going to happen is literally trillions of dollars of stolen funds will be repatriated into our economy, creating an enormous economic stimulus, public works projects, rebuilding our infrastructure, rebuilding our roads, rebuilding our sewers, rebuilding our water system, rebuilding the power grid, rebuilding education, rebuilding healthcare. There's going to be a huge gutting of the corruption in the pharmaceutical industry, which some people call the pharmacidal industry, you know. And, you know, all this weaponized food stuff, they're going to, the squalene and mercury they're putting in vaccines, which literally is poisoning children so that they become autistic. All this stuff is going to get stopped. The fluoridation of the water, attacking the pineal gland and causing autism to get worse. There's so many things that are wrong right now that are going to get turned around when we finally get to this point. So I know it's hard waiting for this to happen. It is the darkest hour before the dawn. Millennials might think that there's no hope, that they're never going to be able to repay their college loans, they're never going to get a good job, they're never going to have that dream of the 1950s. I would disagree. I think that we are going to go through a real amazing economic reboot, and that on the other side of this, we're going to have a much, much happier and more prosperous life in this civilization.
Awesome. So hey, I wanna ask you. We talked about a little bit about past predictions. David, can you give us your predictions for 2019?
So 2019. That's a tough one because the alliance has been trying and trying and trying to get these arrests to happen, and they haven't quite succeeded yet. Another thing that admittedly is frustrating, okay, is that I used to get lots of briefings. There was information coming in all the time, and I could actually select which parts I wanted to disclose and which parts I was going to not bother with. Some of it I didn't disclose just because I don't want to get too political. I don't want to appear to be favoring one side of politics over another. But now there's like almost nothing. The very, very, very limited trickle of information. So it's kind of ironic because now I'm in the same boat as everybody else. If Q doesn't say it, I'm not going to hear about it. And so I'm looking at the Q stuff, and they are seemingly prognosticating that a whole lot of information is getting ready to be dumped in a data dump. And it talks about the indictments, the sealed indictments. It's got stuff with the FISA memos, stuff on the Five Eyes, which are the 5 major countries that are in this cabal, and their intelligence and surveillance apparatus. And so I would expect that in 2019, at the very least, we will be seeing the aftermath or the result of major data dumps taking place, major mind-blowing releases of new information. And I think we're also going to see actual disclosure. I think we're going to start to see some really crazy stuff happening. Another little piece of new intel I can give you guys, and I might get in trouble for saying this, but what the heck?
Yeah, get in trouble.
One of the things I did hear is that there is a possible plan that they will be rolling out a free energy technology through Elon Musk and the Tesla Corporation.
Boom.
Yeah, yep. And that the reason for this is that they can't take the time and the money necessary to properly upgrade our crumbling power grid in America. It's trillions and trillions of dollars, and it's just too much. So that could happen. That's one of the things that might happen. They might use Tesla, because remember, he's already building the Gigafactory, which is supposed to be making batteries. So he's already got the infrastructure in place to do this, to do something that starts to get in everybody's homes. So, I mean, it's anybody's guess. And I'm not omniscient. I don't have any special knowledge beyond what I get. And as I've learned, and you guys pointed out earlier over the years, just because you get a briefing doesn't mean it's going to come true. And there's many, many things that the Alliance conveyed that I really hoped were going to happen, and they've been delayed and delayed and delayed. But I'm really glad that they have created Q, that they've created sealed indictments. They're doing this all legally, procedurally, so that when it comes out, it's not going to look like a coup. It's not going to look like the military overthrew the United States government. It's part of the correct function of the 3 branches of the U.S. government, legislative, judicial, and administrative, and that we're getting this all to happen through a legal, certifiable way that nobody's going to be able to dispute. So it's really, really amazing stuff, and I'm very excited.
Real quick, going with the, we were talking about Tesla. So this is something we have never said on the show either, but we can actually back you up what you're saying, because we heard somebody actually went there. I'm not going to say who or whatever. Anyway, we were told some of the technology, what was used in Tesla, and one of the things they were talking about is this welding machine through sonic waves. They can take 2 pieces of steel and just through sonic waves weld them together seamlessly. So it just looks like one piece of steel. And they were talking about a couple other things I can't remember off the top of my head now. But so they were just like saying there's definitely technology that exists that many companies are using that the public definitely doesn't know about. There's
undoubtedly industrial applications of stuff that we don't know about. all across the board. I know that naval submarines are using a specific type of generator called a homopolar generator that shouldn't even work because you've got the rotor but you don't have the brushes and you don't have the stator part. It just spins, but it shoots out energy in a way that it's not supposed to, and it's very, very powerful. So yeah, there's all kinds of stuff that I've heard like this for sure.
Okay, so we've been talking a lot about like the cabal and all these different things. And one of the things that they're very fearful about especially seems to be like the human race growing spiritually and really understanding more things on a deeper level and raising our collective consciousness and really coming together. And like there's all different kinds of groups like Falun Gong that's being heavily persecuted in China. Even like this Christianity, it's like Christianity is being attacked on like a global scale. And there's all these different things that they're really trying to just destroy, even from the inside. Like if you look at Christianity, all these different churches or the different popes or I don't know, you know, whatnot, that there's all this pedophilia, the media reports on that, and then it just, you know, it just makes people believe less and less in religions overall. What do you think, like why do you think they don't want us to grow spiritually, and what do you think would be a message that you would want to convey to people out there who aren't sure about these kinds of things?
Well, we really do cover this a great deal in Above Majestic, that this is a spiritual war, and we on Earth are really like proxies involved in a struggle between different types of extraterrestrials. And both types of extraterrestrials, both classes, the good ones and the bad ones, have the authority to interfere with our thought processes, to nudge us in different ways. The good ones, which we would think of as like angels, will help us, you know who's calling on the phone before we pick it up without caller ID. We feel something. They help us to meet the right people at the right time. We get synchronicity. We get sudden flashes of insight, and then we find something we didn't think we were going to find. The bad ones, if we're starting to become angry, they will send us energy to make us more angry. If we become fearful, they'll make us more afraid. If we become jealous, they'll make us more jealous. Selfish, controlling, manipulative, they'll strengthen those things. Both sides of this battle, both of the extraterrestrial sides, the negative and the positive, can contact certain groups on Earth that are, or individuals who are highly focused on that side of the fence. So the cabal, the Illuminati side, does have negative extraterrestrials working with them, and this is a very common element. It's the reptilian aspect, certain ETs that look like reptilians. We get into that in Above Majestic quite a bit. The positive side doesn't really necessarily work with the government. I mean, the Alliance does seem to have some contact with them, but not as much as you might think. And so they will have, a lot of these angelic beings are contacting private people like myself, and they're working in a very subtle way where they're seeding these various pieces of information through people who don't even realize that they're receiving angelic contact. So the attack against religion is an attack by the dark side, because remember, these are spiritual beings that in a sense they're flesh and blood, okay, but they live more in a spiritual arena. And both sides require spirituality of the people to be steering in their direction in order for them to do well. So the negative side literally feeds on fear, anger, selfishness, jealousy, anxiety, pain, sadness. When we feel those things, they literally can soak it up. They call it loosh. It's a very important point. Literally, some of these negative ETs will park their ships cloaked over battlefields where lots of people are dying. They'll soak up this energy, and they literally become more powerful from the energy. It literally strengthens them. It makes them healthier. So they have designed, the negative side has designed the Earth as a fear farm. And a lot of people have gotten really confused about the cabal, like, okay, if part of the cabal is Jewish, right, as any group on Earth, there's going to be, if a group forms, there's going to be certain people that are Jewish in it. Some people have tried to say, oh, this is a Zionist Jewish conspiracy. Wait a minute. Then why would Hitler, who was totally cabal, be going after the Jews? Doesn't make sense. Well, here's the thing. The cabal hates anybody who believes in God. Anybody who believes in a positive, loving creator, they think that's evil, that's an imposter. So they go after Christians, they go after Hindus, they go after Muslims, they go after Jews, they go after Buddhists. All the Buddhist countries are getting paid like, $1 a day to work for us and make our products. They're basically all slaves. In many ways, you could look at it that way. So these people just hate anybody who has a faith, because that faith ultimately steers away from sadness, misery, anger, manipulation, control, murder, gets people thinking about ethics, morality, love, forgiveness, compassion, which they don't want. So the main goal of the cabal is to keep the loosh going, to keep people sad, to keep people upset. And one of the most powerful things that my top insider Jacob told me, I talk about him in my book Ascension Mysteries, which I highly recommend reading if you like all this stuff. In the Ascension Mysteries, we talk about this. He said, if these negative beings had the loosh supply interrupted for one day, in other words, if enough people on Earth for one day were smiling, happy, and laughing, the whole negative agenda would completely collapse that day, because they are that dependent on this energy that these beings would literally die if enough of us got happy for one day. And that is worth fighting for as well.
That's great.
Amazing message.
Yeah. Well, okay, sorry, one last thing. What motivates you to keep doing what you're doing? Like, why, like you said previously in our previous episode that, like, you don't make much money from it. People in our field don't make a whole lot of money from this. You could have gone into anything you want, and plus your life is also somewhat in danger. So why do you keep doing this for what you're doing?
So the things that I know are so powerful, the truth that has been exposed to me, that we already have, as we talk about in Above Majestic, we already have bases on the moon, bases on Mars, interactions with hundreds of different races of ETs, each of which might have histories going back many tens of thousands of years, super advanced technology, and then all of the science that I've put together that really shows that what we think we know about science is woefully beneath the level that we need to get to. There is a living consciousness field, there is a living awareness in the universe that is love and that is intelligent. These things will transform society. Knowledge is power. It's a seed of information that cannot be suppressed. And by knowing that these things are true, I am constantly ignited with the passion to want that information out there to the public, because when enough people know about this, we will change the world.
Well said.
Great.
Hey, David, thank you so much for being with us on Edge of Wonder. We really appreciate everything you're doing, and we really appreciate you taking the time, especially away from your family, to be with us. We can't thank you enough.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. This has been a great interview, and I know it's went a little over, but thank you so much.
This is David Wilcock on Edge of Wonder, and we will see you out on the edge.
Yes!